Okay, I'm going to introduce you. So, how do I say your first name?
Yang.
Young. Okay, Young. And then you go by a different name, right? You have like an
Oh, my
American
nickname is Sophie.
Sophie. Okay. Okay. And how do I say your first name again?
Yang.
Young. Okay. All right. So, thank you, Young Sun, or Sophie. It's okay if I call you Sophie during the
Of
interview.
course.
So,
Yeah.
you're a PhD student at MIT, right? And you just finished up.
I'm wrapping up my dissertation.
You're wrapping up your dissertation. Okay. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. So, your paper is making waves across the world as being really important for understanding differences in the way that it's done. And I just wanted to talk to you about it. Um, and kind of just pick your brain a little bit about the project and about your approach to econometrics. But if we could just start, if you could just tell me about yourself, where are you from, and how did you get into becoming an econometrician? How did you end up at Cambridge, and how did you end up becoming an econometrician?
Thanks so much for asking. I'm from China. I came to the US for college and grad school. And I actually started out grad school being more interested in public finance. You can see that the motivation for this paper started in public finance as well.
Mm,
But I met really great advisors at MIT in econometrics. So Professor Anna Mukshiva and Professor Isaiah Andrews,
mm,
um, who took me under their wings. So I guess I gradually blended more econometrics into my grad school work
mm.
as I progressed.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Do you consider yourself an econometrician now?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but
Okay.
I'm also still very much interested in public
In
finance
public
and
finance. Okay.
um, yeah, hopefully there'll be more uh, joint projects
Yeah.
with public finance economists.
Yeah. That's neat. So,
Oh yeah, I
so
should mention Sarah Abraham, the co-author. Yeah, she's in public finance.
she's also public finance. So are y'all in the same cohort? Is that the y'all are both
She's
like
one
attending
year
here at
above
MIT?
me.
She's 1 year above you. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. And so how did this project come about? How did it get started? The Sun and
um,
Abraham paper.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned this as like a live tree because it did have a tree. It had roots in my public finance class with Professor Amy Finkelstein.
Mm,
She was telling us how these event study research designs are very common that are helpful for tracing out the dynamic treatment effects, but
hmm.
sometimes she feels a bit puzzled because the results are sensitive to how you write down the dynamic specification,
Mm,
how many leads and lags you add.
mm,
So she was more just posing this as a question to the classroom, not,
mm,
not as like a research question at the time,
mm,
just out of curiosity. So
mm.
Sarah and I chatted after class and thought that this could be um, a interesting project to look into. So that
Yeah.
was how it started.
Yeah.
Yeah, so very much due to Amy's comment
Mm,
and encouragement for us to pursue this because it was also my third year paper in grad school that she
mm,
helped advising.
mm.
So a lot of credit is due to Amy.
Wow. Wow. So both you and Sarah both kind of just started talking when the question was posed. Y'all both got intrigued by it, or
Yep,
that's what
yep,
happened? Okay. What
yeah.
year was that?
Oh, 2017.
2017. Okay.
uh,
Um, well, okay. So I have some more personal questions, but now that we're talking about the paper, I want to just jump into the paper. So what could you tell me what you see as the core insights in a few words of your paper with Sarah?
mhm. Yeah, so this paper is really about how to interpret the dynamic classification when there are multiple treatment cohorts where each cohort receives the treatment at different times. So if in a perfect world that there is homogeneous treatment effects, that every cohort experiences the same profile of treatment effects, then the
Mm,
dynamic classification is totally valid and helps researchers understand the dynamics in the treatment
mm-hmm,
effects. But
mm-hmm,
when cohorts may experience the treatment effect differently, then there is a question whether the specification is still estimating the average treatment effect for a
mm-hmm,
given lead or lag. So that was how we started looking into the decomposition result for the dynamic classification.
mm-hmm,
Um, and the result turned out to be a bit negative in the sense that if there are indeed heterogeneity across cohort, then
mm-hmm.
treatment effect from a different lead or lag, then the uh, coefficient that's intended for could contaminate this coefficient. So
Yeah.
therefore makes the interpretation um, different from what usually
Well, you
researchers
think it
had
is.
in mind.
Were you surprised by that result?
I have to say yes. So
Mm-hmm,
I was hoping that it would return just an average of the
mm-hmm.
treatment effects from that lead or lag.
Yeah.
But if you really write down the saturated regression, which is the correct classification that allow the all the flexibility in the treatment effect heterogeneity, then it became a bit easier to see why
Mm,
the contamination could happen. And that's because when you have multiple cohorts, even though you write down the dynamic classification with all the uh, relative time indicators,
yeah.
this panel is no longer balanced in both calendar time and the relative time.
Oh.
So that was how you get this contamination because the relative time indicators are still correlated with each other.
Yeah, right,
Um,
right.
yeah.
I didn't really think of it. I did see that in the paper, but I forgot that you said that. So, yeah, when you're doing it in event time, it's no longer balanced in event time. Don't you talk about in the paper though balancing in event time? Do you say something about that? About actually mechanically balancing balancing the data set so that everything has the same not in the discussion of binning and trimming, but or maybe it was in the context of the binning and trimming. But that doesn't seem to solve it.
Oh, I think that was probably about trimming.
Yeah.
So you would drop relative periods beyond certain leads and lags. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, mechanically that would remove the influence from the periods you
Right. Yeah,
dropped,
yeah, yeah.
but
Yeah.
then um, the relative time indicators are still correlated because there are multiple cohorts.
Mm. Okay. 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 Well, how did you go about? So, what's the method of the decomposition that you used to uncover this? Because I spoke with Andrew Goodman Bacon, and he said he attempted it and he was not able to do it. So, I'm curious how how you were. How do you go about tackling that kind of problem? I'm not an econometrician, so I'm just kind of learning more from you about how you went about doing that decomposition. I mean,
Oh yeah, of course. Oh, I want to know from Andrew how he had the visual decomposition. That was very nice. I wish I had that ability. Because to me it was more from um, unfortunately, with a lot of matrix algebra that we start with a saturated regression
mm,
and then try to apply the omitted variable bias formula because you can think of the dynamic classification you start with as the, I guess, what we call the short regression
right.
in the omitted variable bias formula, whereas
Yeah.
the saturated regression as the long regression.
Yeah.
So you can apply the OVB
Mm,
formula to back out I guess the implied coefficient, which
yeah.
would be proportional to um, the regression coefficient from regressing the regressor in the long regression on
Hmm.
the short regression. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was the OVB algebra. But yeah, I wish I had Andrew's visual decomposition. That would make the results much more easier to communicate.
Yeah, sure,
um,
sure. Well, well, yours is fantastic. Uh, so let me ask you this. Okay, why do you think? So there's been a flurry of papers that came out in the last couple of years. Yours is an important part of a suite of papers that I think we're all just going to be studying for a very long time. And I was curious, why is it that it took so long for these problems with two-way fixed effects to be discovered? Why is it just now? And why is it just like all of a sudden all these econometricians, they all seem young, they all seem like junior or PhD students, and there's all this like simultaneous discovery that two-way fixed effects has this bias in this situation, and you find it with the event studies. And I'm just wondering, why did it take so long for us to learn this stuff?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm curious too, because I actually started really inspired by Amy's comment. He was teaching the Deshpande and Lee 2019 paper using the variation in the timing of Social Security office closure.
Mm,
Um, and I guess that was possible because now more administrative data sets are available. So we
right.
do see this flurry of empirical papers using the event study research design.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, you say that in the opening sentence of your paper. You say, or at least in the working paper I have, which is the availability of rich panel data is partly responsible for the explosion in the DD, possibly at least. Right. That's kind of was you sort of argued that in the opening part of the introduction.
yeah, yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, part of it is the panel data from admin has is more of a recent is more recent or has been growing. Is that what you're saying? That the
Yeah.
availability of the panel data sets. Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please keep going.
Oh, no, not at all. That was what I was going to say. At least in my perspective, I learned these papers in grad school and they all seem very recent.
Right.
Um,
Oh, okay. Yeah. The empirical papers that y'all, the empirical papers that prompted your study were recent empirical papers.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's actually very cool how you commented on other econometricians that were working on this at the same time. I guess in 2018, I still didn't know I would become econometrician. And
Right.
it was actually really thanks to my advisors who I think it was Anna who first told me about Pedro Santana and Brent Calloway's paper, and that was really encouraging to know that other like theoretical econometricians are also working on this.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was uplifting to know that this also had theoretical interest.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh, and of course, Shansamata and Doubtful, I think was also contemporaneous.
Yeah.
Um, that was really helpful. And I guess Borusiak and Yaroval had a working paper from 2017 um, um, that was also inspiring. I remember for them, they took the event study pacification as the true model.
Yeah.
So it was slightly different from how we approach this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, you're right. There were many contemporaneous papers.
Yeah. 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 That's. I mean, I think it's fascinating. That's interesting. I mean, so you were being taught empirical papers, or you were reading these empirical papers that were relatively recent, and then just sort of an offhanded comment by Amy or whatever it was, this posing of a question by Amy really gets you and Sarah engaged on a topic that probably needed to have been analyzed 10 years ago. When you think about it, you know, how many
Oh,
papers there's been that use event studies for a diff and diff with differential timing. It's just, it's the mode, you know, for me, it just seems like that's just obligatory to do it this way. And I'm just so impressed that it was you uncovered it, but I'm also really puzzled why why was this not discovered sooner? You know, that kind of leads me into my main question. So, like in grad school, when we learned, when we took our panel sequence, we learned obviously about the fixed effects model and strict exogeneity, allowing for you to have consistent and unbiased estimates of some parameter. And there was clearly no subscripts on the beta, so you would know that it's not heterogeneous treatment effects, I guess. But I never noticed that because we didn't talk in terms of potential outcomes in graduate school, so we never talked about heterogeneous treatment effects. But what I find so confusing is no one has ever explained to me strict exogeneity implies um, it implies either a two by two diff and diff, but it does not imply, it does not work with differential. I don't even have the right words, but strict exogeneity is not going to hold if you have differential timing and heterogeneous treatment effects. And I guess like I'm wanting to hear you respond to what I'm going to say, which is how could we have known that? How could anyone have known that strict exogeneity actually rules out differential timing and heterogeneity? Why would anybody have known that? Did Gary Chamberlain know that? I mean, I know you don't know, but like, did people understand that, or is this a real new discovery? Does that make sense?
Oh, um, yeah, I cannot speak on behalf of
Yeah.
I mean, I think people worked on panel data models from a different perspective. I guess the potential outcome framework is probably more recently incorporated in econometrics. At least when I took it, Professor Josh Angress would teach it.
Yeah.
So I guess I was really fortunate to have taken econometrics with the pioneers in this field.
Yeah. Sure.
So I guess for incorporating the potential outcome framework in the panel data model, then you can see the heterogeneous treatment effect once you kind of group that into the error term.
Right.
If there is heterogeneity, then the error term would be correlated with a cohort indicator. So
Oh.
therefore, the strict exogeneity assumption wouldn't hold under this heterogeneity um, of treatment
Oh.
effects and multiple treatment cohorts.
Right. Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
so that was how I guess it was the potential outcome framework that was very inspiring first, which I
Mm,
think was also the case for Padjo and Brent.
yeah.
That we kind of started with the identification and then moved down to estimation.
Right. Right.
So that was how I'm not sure if this is an answer to
No,
your
that's great. Yeah.
critique of the
Yeah.
panel data model curriculum, but I guess it's just a different approach that we've taken
Right.
um, than
Right.
the textbook approach. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. You know, so this is this has been a puzzle for me. When I read Andrew Gilman Bacon's paper, I come away with cross group, cross cohort heterogeneity isn't the source of the bias in that static two-way fixed effects estimator. It just gets, condensed into that variance weighted average treatment on the treated. It's the dynamic average treated on the treated that creates all this bias for two-way fixed effects in that static parameter. But it seems like I don't know if you're disagreeing, but you really emphasize the cross group heterogeneity and the dynamics actually, so long as everybody has the same treatment profile, that's not going to be a problem. So are those in tension with each other? That, what Andrew says, what Andrew shows and what you show, they're both true. So I guess they're not in tension with each other, but I can't figure out how to reconcile them because it seems like you're saying it's the cross cohort heterogeneity, and it feels like Bacon is saying the cross cohort heterogeneity just gets collapsed into that variance weighted ATT. And I just was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about why those, how to reconcile those.
Oh yeah, thanks so much for bringing this up. I really like your characterization for our paper being a combination of Andrew's paper and the paper of Brent and Pajo, because yes, we actually I think the deviations that we actually focus on a different precipitation, being the dynamic precipitation.
Right.
So it's indeed true that if you focus on the static precipitation, both the dynamics and the cross-cohort heterogeneity would matter for the interpretation, but it
Yeah.
just happens so that the dynamics kind of put in the downward bias
Mm.
more so than the cross-cohort heterogeneity.
Mm-hmm.
But once you move to the dynamic specification that you allow for dynamics, but you didn't allow for cross-cohort heterogeneity, then it's the other dimension that showed up in the bias.
Mm.
Um, and I guess on that approach, we agree with the Pedro and Brent that we might want to start with what they call the group average treatment effect, or what we call the cohort
Cohort.
average treatment effect on the treated. Yes.
Yeah.
So because that's how we can reconcile. So yeah, I think
Right.
the cross cohort dimension also show up in the static specification, but I think the dynamic dimension would matter more for the bias because it really
Mm-hmm.
puts down the downward bias on the long-term effect.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's a great. So it's funny, I guess. You could imagine someone reading Andrew's paper, and well, I've heard people say this. Well, we just need to do event studies. Uh, and then you go to your paper and you find your event studies are flawed because you have all of these contaminations from other leads and lags entering into it, except under this very specific condition, which probably no one's comfortable making those strong statements about homogeneity and things of that nature. So yeah, I guess, I mean, do you think it's an overstate? I mean, it is, should we tell people the problem is using never treated units as comparisons? That's what's driving this. Or do we need to say, no, we're going to need to build different estimators? Because I've heard, the stacking approach that Aaron Dubé uses. It's in many ways that he doesn't develop a new estimator. He just gets rid of all the never treated units, or keeps all the never treated units. But you and Pedro and Brant and Sarah have developed new estimators. So why do I need to use your estimator and not just use stacking or something? Not just continue to use two-way fixed effects.
Okay. I guess there are 2 points. So one is you definitely get rid of the bias if you have only one treatment group. So going from the static classification to dynamic classification with only one treatment group would actually just be fine. I
Mm,
think the paper with Sarah, we are already talking about the situation with multiple treatment groups.
mm,
And why would we need a new estimator? So our estimator is actually not that different from Pedro and Brent. I
yeah,
think they use the not yet treated units to
yeah,
form their control group
yeah,
for us because we were trying to um, uh, I guess frame everything using a regression approach. We're just using the never treated or the last treated cohort as the control group.
right, right,
So we are all trying to estimate the group average treatment effect in their term, and then I guess manually aggregate them.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, of course, this would be a valid approach, but I do feel that sometimes estimating the event study, which is the dynamic classification, would be very natural for empirical researchers to do. So we still have data package to kind of estimate the weights, which would be informative for how much contamination could
Right,
happen in
right,
case of
right.
heterogeneous treatment effects.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I guess there is the robust approach that Brand, Pedro, Sarah, and I have, and
Mm-hmm.
Doobie had also been trying to use, but there's also a diagnosis tool
Yeah,
if we don't worry too much about heterogeneous
yeah,
treatment
right,
effects.
right, 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 right.
Um,
Yeah, okay, so walk me through how you would advise me. So I'm working on this project, or like, hypothetically, I'm working on some project, and I'm going to do an event study, and I calculate these weights. Kind of walk me through, how you would advise me. What am I going? How do I use these weights, and what am I learning from them?
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I think for the empirical illustration in our paper, we actually walk through the weights for the pre-treatment or the lead estimate. So the empirical illustration was about the consequences of hospitalization on
Yeah,
people's out-of-pocket medical costs and
right,
labor market earnings.
right.
So there, because I think when we were writing the paper, we were mostly concerned about the pre-trend test,
Yeah.
since that potential heterogeneous treatment effects could really affect the lead estimate.
Mm.
So in the paper, we were decomposing this lead coefficient, and we were just trying to assess uh, how much weight this coefficient is putting on, say, the lagged effect. And it
Yeah.
turned out that it's actually not that large. So I guess in our paper, we were not that concerned,
Right.
seeing the weights were being very small.
Mm.
Um, um, yeah, I guess that's something we were trying to work on. Like, of course, this is all very subjective. Like,
Right.
when do you call that the weights are being small? So yeah, in the
Yeah.
future, we
Yeah.
definitely want to see if there's a formal test we can provide
Mm.
for this diagnosis tool.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Right. 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 So would you say to someone who does their event studies, and they do their event study, and they find that they fail their that they reject on the pre-trends, and find that there doesn't appear to be any parallel pre-trends, or however you want to say it, but they haven't done your kind of analysis, they haven't used your estimator, and they haven't estimated the weights, what are you going to say to them? What would you say to them when they're discouraged by those pre-trends?
Oh, if they cannot, I see. If they see a significant
Yeah.
return in their estimate, I see. Yeah, then I would suggest maybe check the weights. It's possible that a large pre-trend could come from treatment effect heterogeneity if the researcher sees a large weight on a lag indicator.
Right.
Um, but I think the safest approach would be to do a saturated regression as we proposed, or alternatively, the approach by Brandt and Pagel to estimate the group average treatment effects prior to the treatment. So that would be
Yeah,
the
sure, sure.
lead estimate. Yeah, and then
Right.
you can do a joint test for whether all these pre-treatment treatment effects are zero.
Right,
So I
right,
think that would
right.
be the safest approach.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
And
guess don't panic.
don't panic yet. Okay, good. So the saturated regression, that's going to be group indicators interacted with relative time, as well as unit fixed effects and time fixed effects. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so it's group dummies interacted with event time. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm showing my ignorance. Is, was that being done? Is that common to be done? I actually haven't done enough I haven't done enough differential timing papers to know what the common practice is. But is it when they say a saturated regression, they mean interacting group dummies with the event time as well as the two-way fixed effects? Or was that something that you were suggesting?
Oh, when people say they saturated the regression,
Yeah, that's what they're talking about in a differential timing. They mean group indicators interacted with event time as well as
I see. Yeah, unfortunately, I probably need to check the specification to be sure. Yeah, I guess people have saturate to mean different things. We also use the term interaction weighted,
the interaction
um,
weighted. Yeah.
borrowed from Gibbons and co-authors,
Mm,
Journal of Econometric Method, um,
mm,
that they interacted group indicators with treatment status indicators.
mm-hmm.
So yeah, maybe I should keep to the interaction weighted regression.
Oh no, no, that's great.
Uh,
Okay, okay. So, so let me end with this. What do you like being about? What do you like about being an econometrician, and what do you like about being an economist?
oh, wow.
I'm gonna end with like a personal question.
Oh,
what do you like about those two things?
I see. Will this be on Substack as well?
We can take this off. We can. I'm just, we can. I can. I can stop it right now. I'll stop it.
Okay.
So tell me